There are no accidents in your reality. What you call coincidence, what you think of as misfortune, is none other than the echo of your own assumptions, the shadows of beliefs you've harbored often without knowing it. When you wonder why you were drawn into the life of a narcissist, when you ask why such a draining soul entered your orbit, the answer is not external. It lies within you. It is not punishment, it is purpose. You were not placed in their life randomly, and they were not placed in yours by chance. The narcissist did not find you. You summoned them, not knowingly, not maliciously, but energetically. You were a vibrational match to an idea, and that idea formed flesh and circumstance. The narcissist's behavior, as cruel and confusing as it may have seemed, was a mere not a reflection of who you are in truth, but who you believed yourself to be at that level of consciousness. They were drawn to the part of you that had forgotten its value. They were attracted to the version of you that still entertained the idea of unworthiness, the idea that love must be earned through suffering, or that to be seen, one must first be invisible. They came because your inner conversations made room for them. The words you whispered to yourself, "I am not enough. I must prove my worth. I don't want to be abandoned," acted as a magnet. And so came the narcissist, full of illusions, to play the role you wrote for them without even realizing it. You see, every character in your world is cast by you, not with deliberate action, but with unconscious assumption. The narcissist played their part so well because you had rehearsed that script in your mind for years. Perhaps it began in childhood. Perhaps you were first taught that love was conditional, that approval was based on performance, that to be valued you must be silent, that the only way to feel needed was to be needed too much. When you moved through life with those assumptions unexamined, you unknowingly called to yourself the very personality that would help you see them for what they are. The narcissist did not come to destroy you. They came to awaken you. Their presence was the manifestation of your buried beliefs, and their behavior was the tool of revelation. You were not cursed. You were being shown something vital, something necessary, something sacred. The pain was not the point, the awakening was. The manipulation was not your fault, but it was your mirror. You are not to blame, but you are the creator. This is not a message of condemnation, but of power. Because what you created once, you can uncreate. What you attracted then, you can repel now. The moment you shift your assumption about who you are, the moment you begin to see yourself as worthy, whole, and loved without condition, the narcissist's grip will dissolve like mist before the morning sun. Their power over you was only ever the power you gave them. The pedestal was built by your own thoughts, your own beliefs about lack, about identity, about value. And just as easily as it was built, it can be torn down. You do not need their apology. You do not need their change. You only need to wake up to the truth of who you are, that you are not their victim. You are the author of your story, and this chapter was designed not to break you, but to reintroduce you to your own divine authorship. The narcissist reflects a world where love is control, where validation is withheld, where gaslighting distorts your senses. But that world collapses the moment you stop believing in it. The moment you assume love is abundance, that validation is internal, that truth cannot be hidden, you rise above the need for that dynamic. The narcissist no longer finds you interesting, for you no longer carry the frequency of confusion, desperation, or self-abandonment. You were placed in their life because you were the contrast they needed to feed on, but you remained because you still saw them as the authority. The shocking truth is that the narcissist is not the powerful one. You are. They simply created the illusion that you were not, and the moment you believe otherwise, the entire illusion collapses. You were meant to outgrow this role. You were meant to awaken through the discomfort. The pain wasn't senseless. It was the sound of your soul knocking at the door of your awareness, saying, "You are more than this." That sense of being drained, manipulated, devalued, it was your soul saying, "This is not your home. This is not your truth." But the soul speaks in echoes. And until you hear it, life will repeat its lessons through people and patterns until the message is received. Once you receive it, the cycle ends. When you rise in consciousness and shift your assumption of self from victim to creator, everything changes. The narcissist may try to re-enter your story, but the script has changed. The role no longer exists. You don't fight them. You simply stop being the version of yourself that made room for them. You step into a self, concept so elevated, so rooted in wholeness, that manipulation becomes impossible, not because the narcissist is gone, but because you no longer play small enough to fit in their game. This is the great unveiling. You were placed in the life of a narcissist so that, by contrast, you might remember who you are. Without the lie, the truth would be dim. Without the shadow, the light would be unrecognizable. The narcissist was not your soulmate. They were your mirror, not to be kept, but to be learned from, not to remain entangled with, but to thank and release. For they did exactly what they came to do, awaken you to your power. No one enters your world uninvited. Every relationship is an agreement, conscious or unconscious. And when that agreement no longer serves your growth, it must be rewritten. You were not born to be a servant of someone else's ego. You were not created to validate someone's illusion of superiority. You were born to reveal God in form, to experience love without distortion, to live as the embodiment of truth. And truth does not beg. Truth does not chase. Truth does not need to be explained to the one who distorts it. When you stand in the knowing of who you are, you no longer negotiate your worth. You do not argue with deception. You do not barter with disrespect. You simply embody the reality you prefer, and the old one crumbles in your absence. This is not about revenge. It is about resurrection. You rise not to hurt them, but to heal yourself. You awaken not to punish them, but to set yourself free. And in doing so, you become a light to others trapped in similar dynamics, a living testimony that no darkness can withstand the presence of one who remembers who they are. Yes, the truth is shocking, but only because the world taught you to believe otherwise. You were taught that the narcissist is strong and you are weak. You were taught that their voice is louder, their story more important, their needs more pressing. But the truth is, the narcissist is fragile. Their entire identity depends on your belief in their power, and the moment you withdraw that belief, their kingdom falls. The only power they had was your permission. And now that permission is revoked. You reclaim your life not by changing them, but by changing your concept of self. You reclaim your peace not through confrontation, but through assumption. You assume the role of the loved, the chosen, the free. You assume the role of the healed, and from that state your world reshapes itself. You may grieve the time lost, but understand there was no loss, there was only instruction. You were not delayed, you were being refined. The you who emerges from this awakening is not the same as the one who entered it. You are deeper now, you are clearer now. You know how to discern, how to choose, how to walk away. You know what peace feels like. You know what silence teaches. You know what love isn't. And in knowing that, you have finally made room for what love truly is. What you endured was not in vain. Every tear watered your becoming. Every heartbreak cracked open the shell of limitation. Every silent scream was a prayer rising to a part of you that never forgot the truth. And that part has answered. You remember now. You were never meant to stay in that place. You were never meant to remain unseen, unheard, unappreciated. You were meant to rise, to ascend, to create anew, and now, with the full authority of one who knows who they are, you declare the old reality closed. You no longer serve roles you didn't audition for. You no longer shrink to fit inside someone's fantasy. You expand into truth. You blossom into worthiness. You radiate from within, and the world adjusts to your light. The narcissist did not win. They fulfilled their role. And so did you, but that role has ended, and the new one begins, authored by your conscious assumption, shaped by your divine awareness, empowered by the certainty that your reality is yours to create, not theirs to control. This is your freedom, this is your rising, this is your return to yourself. You are not here to fix anyone. That was never your role. The burden you carried, the illusion that if you just loved harder, if you just stayed longer, if you just gave more, they would finally change, was never yours to bear. That was the lie you inherited, the programming you absorbed from a world that taught you love must hurt in order to matter. But love, in its truest form, is not pain. It is peace. And peace is not passive. It is powerful. Peace is the stillness that stands unshaken in the face of manipulation, that does not respond to chaos with fear, that says, I no longer participate in what diminishes me. When you were placed in that relationship, you thought it was love. You thought the attention, the admiration, the intensity was a sign of connection. But intensity is not intimacy, and attention is not affection. The narcissist mirrored back to you the parts of yourself you had not yet healed. They mirrored the self, doubt you carried in silence. They reflected your fear of being alone, your hunger to be chosen, your silent belief that love must be earned with pain. They revealed your inner story, and in doing so, they gave you the chance to rewrite it. That is the shocking beauty of their role. Without their shadow, you might never have reached for the light. Without the lies, you might never have discovered what truth feels like in your bone. Without being devalued, you might never have remembered your infinite worth. You see, life does not waste experiences. Nothing is meaningless. Even betrayal is a message. Even gaslighting is a wake-up call. Even being discarded becomes the portal to remembering you were never disposable. They played their part, and now it is your time to play yours, not the wounded one, not the broken one, but the awakened one. You were placed in their life so that your presence could disturb their illusion, and they were placed in yours so their illusion could disturb your sleep. You were asleep to your power, asleep to your divinity, asleep to your role as the imaginer of your world, but the pain became the alarm, and now you are awake. What you see now you cannot unsee. What you feel now you cannot unfeel. That heaviness in your chest that used to be confusion is now clarity. That ache that once whispered, "Why me?" now proclaims, "Never again." That silence you endured in the presence of their ego has now become the silence where your soul speaks, and in that silence you are finally listening. You were never supposed to fix them. You were supposed to free yourself, and freedom begins with a decision, not a loud one, not always visible, but a quiet inner shift that says, "This is not my truth." You no longer argue with deception. You no longer engage with those who seek to control rather than connect. You walk away not in weakness, but in wisdom, and the act of walking away is not abandonment, it is alignment. This is what true healing looks like. Not trying to change the narcissist, but changing the inner story that attracted them. Not seeking closure from their lips, but finding it in your own spirit. Not asking why they treated you that way, but asking why you stayed, and what belief within you allowed it to continue. And when you find that belief, you don't shame yourself. You transform it. You hold it in the light until it dissolves. You speak new assumptions until the old ones can no longer survive. The narcissist was not the villain you must hate. They were the actor playing a role you once needed, but that role has ended, and now it is time to change the scene. And when you do, you will notice something miraculous. You do not attract the same energy anymore. People who would have once manipulated you now find no space to attach. Those who thrive on control are confused by your peace. Those who once fed on your uncertainty now find no meal in your presence, because you are no longer who you were. You are the revised version. You are the imagined self made manifest. Your new reality begins with an assumption. Assume now that you are worthy of ease. Assume now that love comes without games. Assume now that you are deeply seen, wholly heard, and profoundly respected. Not because someone gives you that experience, but because you give it to yourself. The narcissist taught you the cost of forgetting, but now you remember, and remembrance is the end of bondage. This truth is what sets you free. You are not a magnet for pain. You were simply rehearsing a pattern. And now you rehearse something new. You speak to yourself with compassion. You choose relationships that reflect your growth, not your wounds. You no longer see rejection as proof of your inadequacy, but as protection from the old version of yourself. And the more you honor your own intuition, the less you tolerate distortion. You were not placed in the narcissist's life to become smaller. You were placed there to awaken your bigness. Your sensitivity is not weakness. It is radar. Your ability to feel is not a flaw. It is the divine whisper. And though the narcissist tried to make you feel crazy, unworthy, and invisible, they could never touch the truth of you. They only touched the mask you wore. But now the mask is gone. This is your rising, not with vengeance, not with bitterness, but with quiet certainty. You do not need to announce it. You live it. You no longer question whether you are lovable. You no longer ask if you are enough. You know, and that knowing radiates from you like firelight, repelling those who once found comfort in your confusion. And so the truth continues to shock. You didn't lose anything in that relationship. You found yourself, you peeled back the layers, you exposed the lies. You remembered that your worth is not up for debate. And in remembering, you altered your world. The narcissist may still be who they are, but they no longer get to define you. Their absence is no longer your emptiness. Their silence is no longer your shame. You walk with peace. You speak with power. You love yourself so completely that no one else's validation is needed to feel whole. You were placed in their life to witness what you are not, to feel the contrast, to choose again, and you did. That is your miracle. Not that you changed them, but that you changed yourself. Not that you convinced them of your value, but that you stopped needing their agreement. You looked at the storm and said, I choose stillness. You looked at the lie and said, I choose truth. You looked at the pain and said, I choose freedom. And from this new place of being, you no longer attract lessons. You attract reflections. People who mirror back your peace. People who resonate with your self-worth. People who meet you where you are, not because they demand you to shrink, but because they celebrate your expansion. The world is no longer your enemy. It is your echo. And what it echoes now is love, clarity, and alignment. The narcissist came into your life like a storm, but storms do not last. And after the winds, after the chaos, what remains is the ground where new seeds can grow. You are the soil. You are the gardener. You decide what to plant, no longer rooted in fear, but in faith, no longer planted in lack, but in abundance. The soil has been turned, the weeds removed, the sun has returned, and you are blooming. This is the power you were born with. The narcissist tried to dim it, but they failed. They always would have failed because your light is not something they gave you, it is something you remembered. And once remembered, it cannot be forgotten, it cannot be covered, it cannot be controlled. So you rise not with anger but with vision. You no longer look back and ask why. You look forward and say thank you. Thank you to the lesson, thank you to the awakening, thank you to the soul that endured until it remembered its source. You do not carry bitterness, you carry wisdom, you do not carry regret, you carry clarity. You do not carry fear, you carry power. The truth that once shocked you now becomes your strength. You were placed in a narcissist's life so you could finally outgrow every version of yourself that once settled for less. And now you are free, free to create, free to love, free to be. There is something sacred about the journey you've walked through, though the world never saw the weight you carried. You wore a smile while your soul ached in silence. You gave when you had nothing left to give. You stayed even when your spirit whispered, leave. And now you stand on the other side, not just with scars, but with sacred wisdom etched into your being. You no longer seek to be saved because you realize now you were always the one you were waiting for. The narcissist was never your savior, never your soulmate, never your source. They were the storm that revealed your shelter. They were the pressure that revealed your diamond. They were the illusion that broke open your truth. And in that breaking, you did not lose yourself. You found yourself. You found the voice within that no longer begs to be heard. You found the power within that no longer asks permission to exist. You found the truth within that no longer needs to be proven to anyone. You no longer chase love that hides behind masks. You no longer negotiate your worth in order to feel safe. You are safe now, not because of what anyone else does, but because of who you have become. You were placed in that life to be the disruption. You didn't just challenge the narcissist, you challenged the cycle. You interrupted the inheritance of pain passed from generation to generation. You interrupted the belief that love must hurt, that control is intimacy, that silence is safety. You interrupted the lie that says stay small to be accepted. And by walking away, by choosing yourself, you did something extraordinary. You created a new possibility, not just for yourself, but for everyone who will come after you. There are souls in this world who will never meet the narcissist you encountered, but because you broke the cycle, they won't have to. That is the power of your choice. That is the magnitude of your healing. That is the ripple effect of your awakening. You did not just heal your heart. You shifted the timeline. You altered the story. You stepped off the stage where that old script played. And now you write new lines with a new voice in a new frequency. What once felt like rejection was actually redirection. What once felt like abandonment was sacred liberation. What once looked like punishment was really preparation. You were not being punished when they betrayed you. You were being positioned. You were not being discarded. You were being delivered from illusions, from dependency, from patterns that had become prisons. And though it felt like death, what really died was the lie that you needed them to be whole. And now something else is born, a new self, a clearer voice, a deeper presence. You walk into rooms no longer wondering if you're enough. You know you are. You do not perform to be accepted. You do not shrink to be liked. You radiate, and those who cannot handle your light are simply not meant to walk with you. That is not loss. That is alignment. That is grace. That is spiritual maturity. You no longer ask, why did they treat me this way? You now ask, why did I accept less than I deserved? And even in that question, you hold yourself in compassion, because the answer is not shame. It is awakening. You see now that your younger self did not know any better. You were loving with the tools you had. You were reaching for connection, even if it meant betraying yourself. But now you have new tools, new truth, a new lens, and with that lens you see clearly. You see how manipulation is not love. You see how projection is not partnership. You see how criticism is not care. You no longer mistake control for concern. You no longer confuse attention for affection. You know what love feels like now. It is peace. It is presence. It is freedom. Anything less than that is no longer your portion. You do not chase. You do not beg. You do not justify staying in environments that corrode your spirit. You bless those who tried to break you because they became your teachers. You don't need to speak revenge. You speak release. You speak healing. You speak abundance. You rise not with resentment, but with revelation. You do not wish them harm. You wish them light, because only the light will expose what they continue to run from. And that is not your battle. You are no longer the fixer, the pleaser, the emotional sponge. You are the sovereign one, the conscious creator, the awakened soul. You understand now that you were never trapped. You were entangled. Entangled in illusion, in roles you outgrew, in stories that no longer serve, and with one decision, one moment of remembrance, the chains fell. They didn't fall because someone freed you. They fell because you finally believed you were free. You remembered that your reality is not something you wait for. It is something you assume. You do not try to change people. You change the assumptions that allowed them into your inner world. You do not need apologies to move on. You do not need explanations to have peace. Your closure is not in their words. It is in your alignment. You close the chapter when you no longer vibrate at the same level. You close the chapter when you can feel the memory and no longer ache. You close the chapter when you can say, "Thank you for the role you played," and keep walking forward with grace, with love, with power. And now you do not fear solitude. You embrace it, because you know solitude is not the absence of love. It is the presence of self. It is the space where you recalibrate, reimagine, and return to your essence. You do not look outward for validation. You become the mirror. You do not seek approval. You embody truth. And in that embodiment, something sacred happens. The world begins to mirror back your new assumption. Peace becomes normal. Respect becomes effortless. Love becomes reciprocal. You no longer wonder if you are hard to love. You no longer internalize someone else's inability to connect as your flaw. You no longer carry their wound as your identity. You let them go, not because you gave up, but because you woke up. You chose clarity over chaos, truth over trauma, peace over performance, and now the universe responds, not because it finally decided to bless you, but because you finally decided to believe, to align, to speak the new reality before it appeared, to assume your wholeness even when everything around you reflected fragmentation. That is the power you were always born with. That is the secret the narcissist could never take. They confused your kindness for weakness. They mistook your giving heart for blindness, but they never understood your resilience. They never understood your rebirth. You rise now not as a survivor, but as a creator. You rise now not as a victim, but as a vessel. You rise now not to prove anything to anyone, but to walk in the truth you were born to live. And every step you take, every boundary you hold, every silent no more, that echoes through your spirit is an act of creation. You are shaping the next chapter not with force, but with frequency. You live in a world that bends to your inner assumption. If you believe you are still broken, you will see reflections of that everywhere. But when you assume you are whole, when you walk in the energy of "I am enough," when you breathe from the place of "I deserve peace," everything shifts. You meet people who do not trigger old wounds. You find relationships that feel like truth, not trauma. You wake up grateful, not guarded. That is the real miracle. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of purpose. And now, your only responsibility is to stay in alignment. Not perfection, alignment, to return over and over to your center, to hold the inner image of your worth so clearly that no external distortion can distract you, to speak the unseen until it becomes seen, to rest in the knowing that you do not need to chase anything. What is meant for you is drawn to the version of you that finally believes. This is the gift of the narcissist. They pushed you toward yourself. In their absence, you remembered your essence. And that is the most shocking truth of all. They never broke you. They revealed you. They introduced you to the parts of you that were waiting to awaken. And now you walk in light, not because the world changed, but because you did, not because they apologized, but because you stopped needing one, not because someone loved you better, but because you finally did. And so it is. So now stand still for a moment and breathe. Breathe not just with your lungs, but with your awareness. Feel what has always been true. You were never placed in that life to be broken, but to break through. You were not sent into that fire to be consumed, but to emerge refined. The narcissist was not your ending. They were the contrast that revealed your beginning. You did not come here to be lost in someone else's illusion. You came here to awaken your own divine imagination and create from that sacred place. You came here to remember your power, not to earn love, but to embody it, not to chase peace, but to be it. And now the time for questioning is over. You know why you were placed there. You were the light in a dark place, the pattern breaker, the cycle ender, the seed of something new. You carried truth where there was only deception. You carried vision where there was only control. You didn't lose yourself, you uncovered yourself. And as you walk forward now, you do so not with wounds wide open, but with wisdom wrapped in grace. You do not need them to validate your growth. Your very presence is proof of it. You are the evidence of transformation. You are the echo of awakening. You are the future your past prayed for. So go forward, not bitter, but bold, not guarded, but guided, not fearful, but full, because now you see, everything that tried to break you was actually breaking you open. And everything that tried to silence you was actually preparing you to speak. You are free now, not because you escaped, but because you remembered, and the moment you remembered, everything changed, and so it is.